So, welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to the Cascading Growth events. You're very welcome, and everybody that's here today, very welcome. And I hope that those of you who watch the recording afterwards enjoy it also. I just wanted to let you know why we set up these cascading events. We started just during the summer of 2024, and we're running events every 2 weeks. And we created the events because we really believe in the power of conversation, and conversation together sparks insights and opportunities for growth. And our goal is to create a space where individuals can come together regularly to share knowledge, ideas, and wisdom, and also to forge new connections. Why did we actually start these events? Well, really, the idea was sparked by us at Adaptus reviewing our own values, so the Adaptus values. And as a result, we've been focused really more on us living our values, because we often work with other organizations and individuals and teams around their own values. So it was really to kind of step ourselves up with living and holding ourselves accountable to these values. And our values that we landed on were courageous insight, which embodied warmth and candor. And that's just that piece around that, only know through knowing ourselves can we have the courage to live and work and create the workplaces that we want to create, where everybody is happy and healthy. Collaborative synergy, where I think any of you who've worked with us know that we are very focused on getting to know each other, collaborating, creating deep connections, and bringing a good, useful experiential experience to the people that we work with. And then cascading growth, which is growth and development. So by encouraging an open, curious attitude towards positive change, we build transformative momentum that allows us to reach our true potential, everyone together. And so these are the things that have become really, they've been important for us all along, but it's just really holding ourselves accountable to living these in our day-to-day, which has become we're bringing more focus to it. So part of that is running these events. And so every 2 weeks we've been getting together, and we've been either interviewing a guest, or we've been running some workshops on the topic of values, our own personal values, how we're living values in organizations. And today I'm so delighted to be joined by the wonderful Nigel Paine. Nigel Paine and I have known each other for over 10 years, I'd say maybe coming up to 15 years now. I've just posted some pictures there of Nigel and myself. Nigel, when he came to visit, was it earlier this year or last year, Nigel? We went to Glendalough, and that's Nigel sitting in the kitchen with the doggy Jojo in the background, my doggy, who's actually here on the session with us. He might come and say hello. And then Nigel and myself at Learning 2019 in Florida, pre-COVID, and then also this year, 2024, at Learning Technologies in London. That's him standing up on the stage and me sitting down looking at the slides. Nigel is an incredible learning leader who has been working in the space of corporate learning for well over 20 years. He's produced learning software, multimedia materials. He offers support and input to public and private sector. He has also worked extensively with universities. He was the co-academic director of the CLO doctoral program at the University of Pennsylvania, which he helped establish that program. And he worked many years ago with the BBC in their learning and development operation, and worked with thousands, over 5,000-6,000 staff members, running onboarding programs and leadership schemes, and establishing state-of-the-art learning and knowledge sharing networks across the organization. When Nigel and I met, he was, I think, became very quickly a real support, friend, mentor to me. And I always love meeting up and chatting with Nigel, because he's so inspiring. And I think that, the way when you meet somebody, we see eye to eye, we think the same way about you know, learning and what's important in organizations. And you can see up here on the slide a couple of his books, or not a couple, sorry, a couple is two, several of his books. He has way more books, but these are the most recent books over the last number of years: Workplace Learning, The Learning Challenge, and Building Leadership Development Programs. And his newest book, which was just published just over a month ago, The Great Reset, which he'll be telling us a little bit about today. And I have been reading this book 2 weeks. Is it 2 weeks? And I've been reading the book, and it's just, I was saying to Nigel earlier, I have so many things underlined and marked and everything, and stars everywhere, because it's really speaking to me. So with no further ado, without further ado, I would like to bring Nigel on board, and I'm going to spotlight you, Nigel. I don't know if I can spotlight myself, but we'll give it a go. And I would like to kick us off, Nigel, if it's okay, by just asking you to share a little bit about your background, and then what you're doing today, like what brought you to the point of what you're doing today.
I wrote in an introduction, which was excised by the chairman, that I was a learning and development tragic, and in some ways I am. That's I've been involved in adult learning for most of my life, but in writ large, you know, from teaching courses, working in universities, working in corporations. See, you spotlighted yourself. Well done. That's great. That's a great start. We're doing well. So I've worked my way through.
Is Nigel still spotlighted, everybody?
Yeah. All good.
Yeah. Okay.
All good.
Okay. I got it.
3 stars.
Sorry, continue,
we give you a badge at the end saying Zoom expert.
Thank you.
C. Mullins.
A learning badge.
A learning badge, exactly. So I started off, I ran a tech company, so I developed software, and I went from there to working on learning, basically enabling learning for people who couldn't make it in the formal system. And I went from there into the BBC, where I spent 5 or 6 happy years, and until at the end, when I spent 1 very unhappy year and left. And then from that point on, I set my own company up, and I've been working almost literally around the world. And I did that because the BBC, by the end, was just so constraining. You couldn't even leave London, let alone go anywhere else. So I wanted to explore and celebrate what was going on in learning and development, try and understand the things that were happening in organizations around the world. And in some ways, that was the genesis for the book. So I've written 4 books in 10 years, something like that, which is not bad going. It always feels incredibly painful and incredibly difficult, but also incredibly necessary. I don't write because I feel a moral duty. I write because I don't understand what on earth's going on. And books really help me understand and think about the processes and the experiences. So, so what am I doing at the moment? I do my monthly TV program called Learning Now TV, which has now had 100 episodes, 120 episodes, something like that. I do a weekly podcast called From Scratch with Martin Cousins, which is up to 300 episodes. I better start doing some new stuff. And I work with organizations on more and more and more, or less and less and less, directly on learning and development. Because I've got some severe worries about the impact of isolated learning and development, and more and more and more on organizational structure, organizational development, and where learning slots into all of that. So a much more holistic approach. And in some ways, that's the trajectory of my books. I'm not going to go through them all, but the first one, Learning Challenge, was all about, kind of written for myself, what would I need to know if I went into running a learning operation at that moment? So it's all about the wonders of L&D. My last book is exactly the opposite. It's all about how you unlock power in organizations. And that has got something to do with learning, but it's much more about social learning, informal learning, and ways of connecting people. And it is about, you know, you've got to learn all about ADDIE or whatever, you know, that I'm not interested in that anymore, sadly. But that's why I'm a learning and development tragic. So that's it, really. So I'm about to go to Australia. I've just spoken at 5 conferences in 10 days, and I'm almost exhausted. So I start getting incoherent. I can blame the connection. I'm now on the south coast of England, and I went into the hotel, checked in. There's a note on the reception saying, "We're very sorry, but our Wi-Fi system is down. We have asked Virgin Media, and they say they will fix it soon." So I'm on 5G at the moment. So if it all goes horribly wrong, then I can blame 5G. If I stumble in my
We'll
words and
improv.
forget what I'm
We'll
saying, yeah,
improv.
you can improv, but anything that goes wrong, it's
Yeah,
5G to blame, not me. Won't be me. Promise
yeah.
you.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that enough?
Don't
That's
worry.
probably way too
Don't worry.
much.
I'm sure you come across these, I'm sure you come across challenges all the time because you travel so much. Everybody, I can never understand how where Nigel gets his energy from. You must just plug in because every time I see you, you're always jumping on a plane to somewhere else, whether it's somewhere else in Europe or Mexico or the States or Australia. So it's amazing and it's inspiring how you keep going. So, can you summarize, Nigel? I mean, I've been reading it and there's a lot of information in it and it's so engaging. Your new book, The Great Reset. Can you summarize The Great Reset for us in a couple of sentences?
I'll do my best. It's really crashing together a few ideas. The first one is that if you haven't got a values-based organization, and I've got 5 values which emerge from the research that I did for the book. So if you don't treat people well and create an exciting, engaging organization, you're not going to get people sharing their learning. And if you haven't got the right structures in the organization, like spaces for connection, permission to connect, connections with outside to ingest new ideas and new information, you'll never have a learning organization. And the third, so it's about structures, it's about values, and it's about some processes. So I talk a bit about action learning and a bit about communities of practice and so on. So the vehicles for openly sharing and building knowledge, problem solving. So in a nutshell, that's it. You don't have to read the book now. It's all done.
Well, there were so many things that jumped off the page to me, Nigel. And one of the sentences I have underlined is is actually it's only on page 9. I promise I have read past that. But it just I
It's the
underlined
best
it because
page.
it said we must focus we must focus holistically on building the next stage of organizational development and rebuilding organizations fit for purpose in this century.
Yes.
What specifically do you mean about in this century? Why is it different?
Because we built organizations for the industrial age and we created structures and hierarchies. Like the basic hierarchy and structure of most corporations is based on the organization of the Pennsylvania Railroad in the 19th century, because it was so big, so complicated that they needed these tight structures and these organizational hierarchies to get the trains running on time. And we've not really come much out of that over the last 100 years. And what I feel is in a world of AI, because I started writing the book and AI, generative AI appeared, and I thought, oh, crikey, I'm going to have to start all over again. And what I realized was that generative AI is actually the means by which a lot of the things that I'm saying will take place. So in an age of generative AI, in an age of uncertainty, insubstantiality, an age of change and transformation, having an old, stolid, hierarchical, process-driven organization is not necessarily the way to be agile. So I think that the next stage is about agility and about repurposing and about staying on top. And that isn't the same as running a railroad, as you can imagine. So that's why I said that I really do think that it's about time we made organizations more human, more fit for people, more accommodating to the diverse population that we have in the workplace, and not trying to basically squeeze people into the organization. I thought the organization has to adapt to the people that we have. And once you do that, you've got the baseline for networking, communicating, and just, I think, accelerating in terms of productivity and ideas. At the moment, most people at work feel no one cares. Most people at work wouldn't share their idea if you paid them. Most people at work feel averagely brutalized, certainly frustrated. And they come to work, they turn up, they do their job, they go home, and that's as much as they can expect. People have got very low expectations of work. And I've talked to thousands of people over the 3 years of writing the book. So it's not totally true, but I think that's more true than less true. And therefore, we need to be brave, and we need to say that one of my values that really jumped out at me. The first value is, second value is value decency and human kindness. And if you ask people how much kindness there is in their organization, you sometimes get people saying, well, actually, I work for a really decent organization and they have been very kind to blah, blah, blah. Most people say, what? Kindness? Not here, mate. And I think that's a kind of bedrock. It's not a that would be lovely if everything else is in place. I think it is essential in order to put everything else in place. So, I've tried. I thought I might as well try and take a radical view, and I can annoy people, and I don't care. And because I just spoke from all the research and all the people I talked to and all the organizations that I work with, and it just became stark to me. And the heart of the organization,
Yeah.
probably not quite at the page you got to yet, Celine, is a comparison between two organizations, Company A and Company B. And Company B motored through the pandemic. Company A just crashed and burnt. They were basically the same organization with the same people. What was different? And that was the trigger for the book, really. How can one survive and one not?
So, Nigel, can I pick up on that? Because I wanted to ask you, if you think about people who are here with us on the session today, or will be watching this session at a later date, everyone is coming from different organizations, from different types of roles across the organization. And, if I was to ask you what's the starting point with all of this, of course, it depends on where everybody is in their own development and
Yes.
culture within the organization.
Yes.
However, I just wanted to ask you, with all the case studies, research, the conversations you had, I suppose is there because often because of hierarchy or because of our role in the organization where maybe we don't feel like we have the level of influence to change things, is there one nugget you could give people that would help them to be brave, to be courageous? Because from my perspective, that's what it's all about. We have to sometimes say things that are not going to be popular. We have to reach out and have conversations to develop relationships to get the change happening that we want to have changing. So is there any, again, from your case studies, the research, the conversations you've had, any golden top tips you could give?
Well, I suppose that the most golden of all the top tips is to work with adapters. That will solve all your problems immediately. If you want, if you want me to tell you what I think is at the heart of the book, it's called fieldwork. It's a really simple word, but the problem I've found with so many
Yeah.
people who work in OD, learning and development, and other kind of service functions is they actually don't know what the hell's going on in the organization. And the only way you will learn is by doing field work. And I say to people, just go out there and talk to those people. If you ask this really simple question, what stops you doing your best work? Just ask people. And you will find the most extraordinary range of responses. And people will tell you that. And what you find from that field work is that there are one or two things that are very easy to deliver that will make a massive difference. And there are other things that are very hard to deliver. And you have to decide which ones are the most important. And then you build your agenda for action. And that can take 3 years or 5 years. But if you keep moving along that agenda, you will then meet people's expectations and they will trust you and they will go with you and they will be willing to take the next step because you've proved that by changing the organization, you can make their life easier. And so many people plunge into huge change programs and transformations. They never actually ask anybody, what do you want? What do you need? What's the problem? Whereas people know what the problems are. I'm amazed at how willing people are to share with you, this doesn't work and that makes it impossible. And I do this in spite of the procedures that I'm forced to follow, or this group fight that group and this group won't share anything with this other group. You can work out where the blockages are, the failures in communication, and just the kind of idiocies that drive many organizations that put procedure before people. So one of my other values is value relevant procedures and operations. Therefore, check what is relevant and sort out the ones that aren't, or and get rid of some of the others. So field work is my absolute bottom line exploration. Understand your organization, because things happen in context. There's nothing in the book that says, well, if you do these three things, you'll transform everything. Because I have no idea. Funnily enough, I don't work in those organizations. I don't know. I can make guesses, but they can find out and surgically pinpoint what needs to be excised and what needs to be stitched up and what needs to be built upon. It's not difficult, but no one does it.
And I think that in my experience, people who do field work don't have enough conversations with enough stakeholders that might be coming from different perspectives.
They listen to executives who don't know what they're talking about.
Nigel,
that's the problem, Celine. They listen to the wrong people. Like if I'm in charge of a group, I can tell you exactly what's wrong with this group. Oh, I know everything, but I could be wrong. And the only way you understand if I'm wrong or not is you're going to talk to those people. It's like when I wrote the leadership book, and we were looking at how do you work out the impact of leadership, and I realized that if you go and talk to the leaders who've been through the program, they're the worst people to talk to. They're going to say, "Oh yeah, I was one. Oh, look at me." Talk to the people they lead. What's changed? What have you noticed? What have you noticed different? And if they go, nothing, the program has failed, full stop, end of story. But mostly they say, oh, yes, it's great. And you write back, oh, it's been really successful. Everyone's loved it. It's all been wonderful. No, it's wonderful when there's change, when things change, and people notice when things change. Not the people necessarily who are at the heart of it, but the people on the receiving end. So I love doing field work. I love talking to people, and I've never had a bad experience. I've never had people. Well, I've had one or two people very nervous about speaking. Are you sure this is confidential? But by and large, once you open people up, they love talking. They absolutely love talking.
Okay, so I might come back to a few things in the book, and also we'll open up to the audience as well. And I suppose just because the sessions that we're running are all about helping ourselves and each other to think about values and what is important about values and how can we align to our values and how do our values drive us and motivate us. And also, for the world that we live in today, as you said, the century that we're in right now, I think it's more important than ever that we come back to finding what our values are and what's important to us, and work out how we can align to those values to work more effectively and help others be happier and more comfortable in their roles as well. So could you tell us a little bit about what values have helped you, that have been important to you and helped you to get to where you are today, living the dream that because you're writing books and you're traveling around the world and you're really doing work that you're passionate about. So what are the values that have got to that point?
I thought you were going to say, how come you pick values that got you to where you are today? Surely anyone else who wants to get on in the world should do the opposite. You don't want to end up like you. But the truth is that there are three or four things that were very, very important to me. The first one is trust. Trust is at the heart of everything I do. And when I started my company, I said to myself, I will never work with people I don't trust. And I stuck to that. And it's stood me in very good stead. Because as soon as you suspect someone or you're not quite sure what their motives are, it always comes unstuck. So trust is fundamental. And the other thing is integrity. Don't tell Celine one thing about me and tell something the opposite to my face. I like to work with people who have integrity and openness. And thirdly, just about doing stuff, not about making me look good. And you do meet, sad to say, people quite senior in organizations, when you realize very early on that this is not about making the organization better or solving a problem, it's about making that person look great, so they can then go on and sell it and move on and do something else. So I just won't work with people like that. As soon as I get a feeling that this isn't going to work, I'd rather walk away and then work with people with integrity that I believe in and I can trust. And the third thing, I suppose, which is really important, is having honest intentions. That I don't want people who say we got to sack half the population. How can we do that without them noticing or whatever? I'm only interested in organizations that say we've got to change this organization, and we've got to consult, and we've got to do it very, very fairly, without without fairness, without favor or fear. And they're the organizations I want to work with. And that's taken me into some absolutely amazing places, places that do kind of lift my soul a little bit. And I think, well, the world could be a much better place if everything was like this. So so my values are kind of the ones in sort of embedded in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nigel, I'd love to delve into those values and where they came from and how they've influenced you a little bit more. I guess I'm just mindful that, again, to be in the situation, as I said, living the dream, where you do get to choose the people a little bit more than you
Yeah,
might
which is
have
lucky, which is
that
lucky.
you want to work with, compared to when you were in working in organizations such as the BBC, etc., and prior roles to that. Is there any advice you can give people then around values when they are, very, excuse me, committed to working with an organization, but have to deal with other people who may not align to the same values that they align to? Have you any, I don't know, thoughts or advice on that?
I think it depends on just the degree of that disconnection. And if it's a very severe disconnection, I think value your integrity above everything else. So I've advised quite a few people in my time just to move on, move away, because that's not acceptable. And I also think that you've got to start drawing lines that wherever you are in your career, in your life, there's a line you shouldn't cross. And when I was working in the BBC, there were a lot of really young, smart people who, because they were desperate for work, would do anything. So I met someone who'd ended up being a camera person on Big Brother, and it made them sick. It was awful. They had a terrible time because it's all, anyone who thinks that Big Brother isn't scripted, it's scripted, it's made up, and it's designed to kind of wreck people's lives. And so she kind of crossed a line that she regretted and probably still regrets to this day. And I think you need to help people make their own. I don't know where that line is for anybody, but I do know that I can help people decide for themselves where that line is beyond which they will not go. And if you think of Enron, if you think of the really good people, thousands of good people in Enron who started to fake invoices, basically get involved in fraud and illegality, knowing that this was the wrong thing to do, not wanting to do it. And they drew that line very poorly and regretted it. And some of them ended up in prison or with criminal records as a result. So I think you have to have your own ethical framework in which you operate, and the organization you work for should align with that framework. And if it doesn't, you should call it out. And if when you called it out, it's ignored, then I think you've got a choice to make. So I think your own personal integrity above all else. It's really important.
Nigel, with that in mind, were there any specific incidences, experiences that you had in your life and in your roles and work that helped you to recognize how important these values of trust, integrity, etc., were for you that you'd be able to share?
One, I'll try and anonymize much as possible. But I worked for the EU as an external referee for a multi-million dollar program in one of the EU member states. And I was sent in with two other people as the kind of arbiter of the money going in to make sure it was well spent. And when I started to, I went there, went to the country. I nearly said the name. I went to the country every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks for 9 months or a year. And what I began to realize was the whole thing was a total fiction. That all the things that they were getting to show the EU investigators was just fabricated in order to keep the money flowing. And the money was basically going into the treasury. It wasn't being corruptly taken away, but it was being corruptly used. It wasn't being used for the purposes. And that slow dawning meant then you have a decision, and they're taking you out to meals. People are being really nice to you, and you have a decision. What are you going to do? And we red flagged it, and all hell broke loose. As you can imagine, this is government, dealing with a government and a government body not doing the right thing. And at the time, it was pretty scary because it would have been so much easier just to nod it through. No one would have known. The EU would never have found out if we'd have done that. But we decided that in terms of our own integrity and reputation, we had to red flag, and that was very hard. But I've never regretted that for 2 seconds. The minute I got on the plane out, no, I wasn't ever going to be invited back. I was more than happy. So you
That's
can't buy
important, isn't
somebody.
it?
I thought it was important. Yes, I
Yeah,
thought it was
yeah,
important.
yeah. I suppose you have to be very brave, you have to be courageous to align and help others to align to values, and then you have to be willing to walk away sometimes. And the any of the experiences that you've had throughout your career, like I know from talking to you that so many of the say, shall we say, negative experiences that you've had earlier on in your career, which we've all had at some point, whether it's the culture, whether it's the people, whether it's the managers we've had, how they influenced you, even getting to the point with this book and pulling all of this together and doing the doctorate, the research, committing those 3 years to having the conversations and doing the research. Like, how have those experiences fed into this?
It's really interesting because one of the things that my supervisor did during my doctorate was to go back to look at some of the early experiences and see how much of that formative process was still visible today. And he helped me see some really
Mm,
interesting things I just completely missed. So he sent me back into looking at some of the research which kind of brought alive some of the early work that I'd done. So I actually think it's all very, very important. And that some of the brutal ways that I was treated, not often, but certainly brutal ways. The brutal ways I've seen other people being treated went into my soul. That's iron in the soul, and I would never work for them. I'd be much more explicit now about the kind of organization I want to work for. And if they start to bully people, treat people badly, treat people as commodities that can be brought in and thrown out at will, I'm not interested. I just won't help, and I won't work in those organizations. That's my personal decision, and it's based on, it would be hypocritical of me to have gone through certain things, had a terrible experience, and then willingly put other people through the experience. I just think that's absolutely immoral. So yeah, the ethical side of things came through strongly, and it's certainly strongly in the book. But it's not because it's a good thing to do. It's a good for business. I'm talking about how you succeed in business, how you can flourish in a very difficult environment. And one way you can do it is by treating people well and drawing on the smarts, on the intelligence and the nous of everyone who works for you, not just the people in the boardroom or the senior executive team. And the organizations that just rely on the senior executive team are often the ones in deep, deep trouble because they're ignoring all of the information that pours in from outside. The people on the front line know far more about what's going well and what's going badly in a company than a CEO sitting up in her office just looking at spreadsheets or looking at third filtered information. They get it raw and they get it rich, and it's very easy to ask them. It's called field work, as I said. So yes, that's very true, Celine. I think those things all align in my mind.
Yeah, and I think also, sometimes when we have conversations with people around values, and we ask them what's important to them, people will say, "Well, do you mean my values at home with my family and friends, or do you mean my values at work?" And would you say that your values at work and who you are outside, or do you think there's differences?
It's very. I remember once at Penn we had an ethics professor who's now retired, and he first class he came in and said, "Okay, define business ethics. Come on, all of you. I want you just to get in a huddle, define business ethics." And so, like people would come and say, "Well, it's this and this." And he said, "What's the difference between business ethics and general ethics? Go away. Come on, come back to me." And people would come back with a list of things that were business ethics, and he'd wait for this whole process to go through, and then he'd say, "Of course, there is no difference. Ethics are ethics. There is no such thing as business ethics." If you are, you're talking about immorality and corruption. So let's just start again, shall we? Let's define ethics. And I thought that was a great way a great perspective to start, because it's true. There should be no difference. You shouldn't have different
Mhm.
standards for what you do in the workplace. Then you come home and you treat your family in a completely different way. There's something
Mm.
really weird if that is the
Yeah.
case. Or people saying, I know that was awful,
Yeah.
but hey,
And
business is business. Business is business.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think we have all met people who separate them up.
Yes.
And I think something that really resonated for me with the book is this concept of um, wicked problems. Because
Yes.
most of us in our day to day now are facing wicked problems, and we're faced with wicked problems globally. And so, unless, if we have to be two different people in how we deal with the wicked problems going on in our workplaces and around the world, and then we're trying to be a different person at home, it's a huge amount of energy that really we don't have to give, because wicked problems require us to show up authentically, to have to do the field work, to have the conversations, and to be able to be flexible, to live in the gray. Nothing is black and white or all or nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Would you like to talk to that piece, the wicked problems piece, and again, the world
Mm.
that we're living in, and those of us who are involved with learning in organizations, to expand on that?
It's based on the work of a number of academics, and they divide problems into three. There are critical problems, there are complex problems, and there are wicked problems. And a critical problem is one where you just have to do something. The house is on fire. You don't have time to consult over it. Let's come together. We need to what's the best strategy for dealing with this fire? No. Let's get the whiteboard out, and we can prioritize it. Get some flip charts. That obviously, if the house is on fire, you put it out. There's an instant reaction, and it's usually going for an expert, following a checklist, whatever it might be. That's one thing. Complex problems are those where there is an answer. And they used to say managers deal with complex problems, but leaders deal with wicked problems. And a wicked problem is one where there's no obvious answer. And that as soon as you try to deal with the problem, it changes, it morphs. An attempted solution changes the nature of the problem that you then have to work on again. And you perhaps never work out how to solve it. All you can do is get closer and closer to resolution. You might never ever get there, or it just completely changes. So a wicked problem is very, very difficult to deal with, but it is the essence of contemporary life. How do you deal with and a wicked problem? If you take a wicked problem, it's like environmental change. How does an organization deal with environmental change? How does an organization deal with the current geopolitical situation? These things are not resolvable, but you should have a view. And the best way to deal with a wicked problem is not to say, I am Celine Mullins, I can do this. You've got to say, I need to talk to a whole load of people. We need to work together, and we'll work out the current best solution, and we'll try that. And if it fails, we'll work on another one and another one. And eventually we'll get closer to a resolution, or we'll do our best to overcome the issue and the crisis. So we're living in a world increasingly of wicked problems. And if you read the early literature, Keith Grint is one of the guys I admire a lot at Warwick Business School. And Keith Grint, he was writing 20 years ago, saying it was as if, you have critical problems rarely, but they do come up. You have complex problems regularly, and you deal with them. Wicked problems, once in a blue moon. Now it's the exact opposite. We're surrounded by wicked problems that we have no way of knowing what to do about them. And one of the key leadership values is to say, I don't know how to deal with this. Not, oh, yes, I'm the leader. Of course I know. No, you don't. And the fact that you're prepared to admit that you need to take advice and we need to work on this together is also one step forward to solving it than pretending that you know something that you don't. And that
Mm.
is catastrophic often in a world of wicked problems. COVID was a wicked problem. But every time you tried to do something, we just lock everyone up. Then a whole bunch of other problems immediately spilled out of that
Mm.
solution. And there was no correct solution. But every organization had to deal with it. And some, if you read the book, some dealt with it brilliantly, really brilliantly, and others, it was a walking disaster area. And that's a
Mm.
great example of poor leadership and good leadership. poor
mm,
organizational structures and good organizational structures.
mm. And I suppose then the perspective of the rationale, the reason we need to get more focused on creating learning organizations is to be able to deal with this increased amount of wicked problems that are coming our ways. And you talk in the book about the importance of dialogue and inquiry, team learning, empowering connectivity, systems to share and capture the learning, and various other ingredients. And it's kind of, I suppose, when a lot of us think about our day-to-day jobs, there are all the things that we have to do. And then there's also the thinking this way where, well, am I creating learning in my team, and how am I doing that? Am I creating dialogue and inquiry, or am I, by just in the way I show up, sometimes shutting people down? Am I really focused on continuous learning opportunities, or are we just creating learning opportunities that are a workshop that we attend every now and then? So
Yes,
are we
you're absolutely
creating
right.
that continuous learning loop?
100% right.
Yeah, and
I would add one more statement to that is, are we extracting learning from the workflow, and are we putting learning back into the workflow? That's absolutely fundamental. If learning doesn't make work better, what are you doing? It's not a kind of
yeah,
bolt
yeah.
on or a nice to have. It should be fundamental, and the workflow needs to be fixed in many, many organizations for the reasons that you've
Mm-hmm.
just said. So learning from the
Mm-hmm.
workflow back into the workflow is fundamental now, I would argue.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to pause and stop our recording just to get a couple of questions and thoughts and comments from our audience, and then I might just come back to something at the end of our conversation in a few minutes. So I'm just going to pause. So thank you to Nigel Paine for joining us today and have a conversation about values and also everything that he's learned in writing The Great Reset. I just wanted to share this as a final slide, just to invite you, if you haven't worked with us before, to check out the website, adaptivetraining.com. We work with a range of organizations in Ireland and internationally, across public and private sector, including universities, and we help organizations to create more useful learning experiences and also build learning organizations through all sorts of different approaches. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.